Welcome to the ARC Showcase. Showcase note: Uganda is used as the illustrative country context. The projects shown are fictional examples created for the showcase, and the platform shown is not the official Uganda National Carbon Registry. ARC is a national carbon registry solution. It supports both the compliance market under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and the Voluntary Carbon Market, the VCM. The platform is built around three portals for three groups of users: the DNA portal for the officers of the designated national authority, the body that oversees the carbon market in the country, the public portal for the public, and the project developer or project proponent portal for the developers who bring the projects. This showcase walks through all of them, following a project from the very beginning all the way to an internationally transferred mitigation outcome. Let's start where the public starts, the public portal. Anyone can browse it without logging in. At the top, we have the navigation to the main public pages and an informational hero section, and just beneath it, 4 live numbers that tell you the state of the market at a glance: the total tons of CO2 equivalent mitigated, the number of active projects, the ITMOs transferred so far. Below that is a map of the country. Every registered project plotted on it, shaded by density, so you can see where carbon activity is concentrated, with a short leaderboard of the top regions. Next to it, a breakdown of projects by sector, AFOLU, energy, waste management, and so on. And further down, a selection of the projects themselves, and the partners supporting the registry. The reason all of this out in the open before anyone signs in is that a carbon market only works if people can trust the numbers. These figures come straight from the live registry, so what the public sees is what the registry holds. Let us look at the projects page. From here, anyone can browse every project, filtering by region, by sector, or by milestone. Opening one project gives the public view, its estimated annual and total emission reductions, its crediting period and type, a gallery, the description, and its public documents is available. There's also a channel to raise a grievance, and the SDG co-benefits the project contributes to. The public doesn't see the raw technical files. What surfaces is only what the proponent has explicitly made public, like the Community Development Agreement. One more public tool: document verification. Every official letter the registry issues carries a serial number and a QR code, and on this screen, anyone can enter that serial or scan the code in the document, and the registry confirms on the spot whether the document is authentic and which project it belongs to. Now we cross over to the DNA portal and the project proponent portal. We start with user management and setup. For the DNA portal, the admin side of the registry, where the DNA team runs everything, the platform comes prepackaged with a single super administrator account. When they log in, their first job is to set the registry up, and that starts with access in 2 parts. First, roles. On the role configuration screen, we create a role, a reviewer, a committee member, a finance officer, and assign it permissions from a detailed catalog, grouped by function. Every action in the admin portal is gated by one of these, so a role sees only what it's entitled to. Then the super administrator creates the individual DNA officer accounts and assigns each a role, and they're invited to sign in. The point of this is separation of duties. The person who reviews a submission is not the person who approves a payment, and every role is on the record. The super administrator also sets the fee schedule: the concept note fee, the project design fee, the issuance, administration, and transfer fees, each with 2 rates, one for citizen-owned organizations and one for non-citizen. With the team and the base setup in place, the registry is ready for its first proponent. Let's see how project proponents set up their accounts. Unlike the DNA officers, who are created here by the super administrator, proponents sign themselves up. They self-register from the public portal, and the DNA then verifies and approves them. They go to the public site and click register. We ask for only a few things to get started: their name as it appears on their government ID, an email, a phone number, an ID number, and a password, each field with a tooltip explaining exactly what we need. They must open and accept the terms and the privacy policy before the sign up button will even enable. When they submit, we send a verification link to their email, and clicking it activates the account. Only then are they in. Let's look at the first proponent journey: setting up their organizations. The very first thing the platform asks them to do is set up their organization. Because carbon projects are run through registered legal entities, so the organization has to exist before any project can. On the proponent side, they fill in a 4-part wizard. First, the organization's information: legal name, type, physical address. Second, its contact details and business registration number. Third, the documents: proof of ownership, the certificate of incorporation, a tax compliance certificate, a signed declaration, and any licenses, with a declaration template to download right there. And fourth, a review before submitting. Notice the footer as they work. Draft autosaved, you can leave and resume from any device. Once submitted, the organization shows as pending review. On the DNA side, that submission becomes a task in the queue, assigned to the officers who review organizations. A reviewer opens it, works through the documents, and does the one thing that really matters here. On the Business Ownership tab, they declare whether the organization is majority citizen owned or not, and record a justification. The platform is strict about this. The approve button doesn't even appear until the ownership type is set. So classification always happens as part of approval. They can then approve, return for correction, or reject, and whatever they decide, the proponent is notified by email and in the platform with the reasons attached. And once the organization is approved, the proponent can switch into it and the full portal opens. Their dashboard with the navigation on the left, their projects, notifications, and transactions, and the onboard a project button. Alongside the business, we verify the individual. This is KYC, Know Your Customer. A banner on the dashboard prompts them to complete it. Opening it, we capture their citizenship status, their document type and number, and an image of the ID, and the panel explains upfront why we need it. From here, there are two routes depending on the country. Where the registry is connected to the National Identity Register, the check runs automatically, the details are validated against those records in the moment, and the person is verified on the spot with no officer involved. Where that automated route isn't available, or the check can't be matched, it falls to a DNA officer on the KYC verification screen to review and approve or reject. Either way, the proponent is notified. That completes user onboarding. The registry is set up and a fully verified proponent ready to transact. Next, we look at onboarding a project, the project concept note, and the letter of no objection assessment. The project starts as a project concept note. In some countries, it is called a PIN, project idea. The proponent clicks on the Add Project navigation. This opens up a 7-step wizard with a stepper across the top tracking progress and every field carrying a tooltip explaining its purpose. Step 1 is the project itself, its title, its sector, how it links to national priorities, and its location, with additional sites and GPS coordinates if it spans several, plus the land size, timeline, budget, objectives, and activities, images that will appear on the public portal, and the sustainable development goals, each with a written description of how the project contributes. Step 2 turns to the proponent, and it opens with one question. Is the proponent also the proprietor, the owner of the land or asset behind the project? If yes, the step is done. If not, they upload a letter from the proprietor authorizing them to proceed and then give the proponents full details. Step 3 is the proprietor themselves, their details, the category and registration of their organization, a description of their role in the project, and one question that shapes the next step. Does the project have an upfront buyer? If it does, step 4 captures that buyer. If there's no upfront buyer, the step simply passes. Step 5 is the carbon detail, the substance of the concept note, the greenhouse gases targeted, the quantities to be reduced or removed, the time frame, the expected start date, the base year of the first expected credit, and the project lifetime. The baseline scenario. What would happen without the project? The expected credits per annum and the projected proceeds, the environmental and socioeconomic benefits, the carbon standard to be used, the project costs, assessments such as the Environmental and Social Impact Assessment Report, the EIA license where one exists, and for forestry projects, the REDD Plus Safeguards Assessment. Step 6 lays the whole concept note out as a summary, every section reviewable at a glance, and closes with the declaration. They download the declaration template, sign it, and upload it back. Step 7 is payment, the concept note fee at the rate their ownership category attracts, itemized as the project fee, the transaction fee, and the total paid by card, mobile money, or manual proof, which the DNA's finance side approves. And once payment is made, the receipt is right there to view, and the entire concept note can be downloaded as a single document, every response they gave in one file. The submission is confirmed with a short "what happens next," and they can track it from their dashboard. On the DNA side, this PCN submission triggers a task in the queue. The officer it's assigned to starts with a completeness check, confirming that everything required is actually there. And if something is missing, the concept note goes back to the proponent for correction. Once it's complete, the assessment proper begins, and it is not a single officer's decision. It goes to a committee. The DNA constitutes one. On the Create PCN committee screen, we give it a name, bind it to this concept note, and pick the members from the multi-sectoral technical committee, filtered by sector, exactly 5 of them, with exactly 1 designated as chairperson. The platform won't let us submit until that's right. Once created, the concept note is in front of every member. The committee works through the concept note, compiles its findings into a recommendation, and the chairperson submits it. That recommendation is not the final word. It goes to a second approver, often the DNA coordinator, who reviews the report and the recommendation and makes the formal decision. Approve, return it to the multi-sectoral committee for further review if they're not satisfied with the recommendation, or reject, always with written feedback. On approval, the registry generates a letter of no objection, automatically with its serial number, its verification QR code, and the National Carbon Registrar signature. On the proponent's side, they're notified, the letter appears on their project ready to download or verify, and their project timeline advances. A horizontal track of stages with a green "You're Here" marker, and a card underneath confirming where they are and pointing to exactly what to do next. That's the letter of no objection, the country's formal green light. Next, activity approval, the project design, and the letter of approval. The proponent has 12 months from the letter of no objection to submit the project design document, the PDD, and once it's in, the DNA's review runs. On the proponent side, the PDD submission gathers 3 things. First, the regulatory documents, the requisite national and county government approvals, the stakeholder report, the evidence that communities were genuinely consulted, and the independent project validation report. Second, the community dimension. They declare whether the project spans more than one region, and if it does, they select the regions, state the number of communities involved, and upload a community development agreement for each one. The platform counts them in as they go and won't move on until every community is covered. And these are the same agreements that surface on the public portal for anyone to see. And third, the project design detail itself. The expected credits per annum, the total credits expected over the project's life, the detailed monitoring methodology, exactly how the reductions will be measured, and the crediting period in years. They pay the PDD fee and submit. On the DNA side, the PDD lands in the queue with an assigned officer who first checks it for completeness, sending it back to the proponent if anything is missing, before the DNA constitutes an ad hoc committee for it. Name members drawn from the multi-sectoral pool, a chairperson on the record, and the PDD assigned to them. The committee reviews it, verifying each document in turn, the design document, the validation report, the impact studies, the consultation, the approvals, and submits its recommendation through the chairperson. Then the second level decision, the approver either approves, returns it to the committee for further review, or rejects. On approval, the registry issues the letter of approval, which the proponent is notified of and can download. The letter of approval approves the activity. It confirms the project may operate and generate credits in the country. It is not yet authorization to send those credits abroad under Article 6. That is a separate, later decision. Conflating the two is one of the most common mistakes in this space. The activity is approved and the project can start. Next, implementation and monitoring. With approval in hand, the project enters implementation, and the notice of implementation screen opens with one question: does the project need more time? If not, the proponent records the start date and proceeds. If it does, they request an extension, the suggested period in months, a written justification, and any supporting documents. And that request becomes its own task on the DNA side to review and approve or decline, with the proponent notified of the outcome. There's also a considered exit here. A proponent whose circumstances have truly changed can formally withdraw from the project. Then comes monitoring. Once the project has been implementing on the ground, typically for a year, the proponent returns to file a monitoring report, and they'll come back to do the same for every year of the crediting period. That recurring cycle drives proponent compliance. Each period, the project has to show its results before anything more can happen. The report itself is a 4-step submission. Step 1 identifies the report, the proponent, the project, the reporting period, and who completed it, their name, designation, and contacts. Step 2 is the technical performance, a description of the activities implemented during the period, and the numbers, the credits actually generated against what the project design predicted, the comparison with the previous period, the estimate for the period ahead, and the greenhouse gas reductions achieved within the reporting window. Step 3 is everything around the carbon: the financial performance, volume sold, the price per credit, the buyers, the revenue and operating costs, and the project's social contribution, along with any disputes, the adaptive management applied, a forward-looking risk and opportunity assessment, and the way forward. And step 4 is the signed declaration and submission. On the DNA side, the report is assigned for review, and the DNA compares the achieved reductions against the estimates before anything can be issued, notifying the proponent once it's accepted or asking them to clarify where the figures don't reconcile. With verified reductions on the record, we're ready to record the credits. Next, issuance and authorization. Once a monitoring report is accepted, the project reaches issuance, and a project will raise more than one over its life. They sit on the project as a list, each with its own status. And here's a point to be clear about. The credits themselves are issued by the Independent Crediting Program, the Carbon Standard, Verra, or Gold Standard. The registry does not issue credits. What it does is record that issuance. So on the proponent side, the issuance form captures the details from the standards registry, their account ID on that registry, and the project's own ID on it. Two different identifiers, and the form explains both. The credit use labels, whether the credits are marked for retirement, trading, or a buffer pool, the date of registration, the volume in tons of CO2 equivalent, and the serial number units. They attach the evidence of estimated revenues and the administrative fee receipt. On a first issuance, the proof that the administration fee was paid. Then sign a declaration and complete the payment step just as before. On the DNA side, the issuance is verified against the accepted monitoring report and the fee, and the credits are recorded into the national holding. At this stage, in Article 6 terms, these issued units are mitigation outcomes, MOs, and straight away, 10% is set aside into the buffer reserve held back against the risk of reversals. And this is where the two markets part. If the project is a voluntary one, the credits can be listed and retired domestically, and there's no international accounting to do. The journey effectively ends here. And if a voluntary project later wants to go international, the platform tells it exactly what to do. Seek authorization, because Article 6 credits can't simply leave the country. Authorization comes after issuance, and it's a 5-step request. Step 1 frames it. Whether this is a first authorization or the renewal of an authorization period, renewals attach the prior letters. Whether the DNA has previously rejected a request for this same project, and the volume of ITMOs in tons being sought. Step 2 is the eligibility case, and this is where the mechanism is actually chosen. Article 6.26.4 or CORSIA. Along with how the project aligns to the country's whitelist, the share of credits reserved for domestic use, the authorization period start and end dates, and the environmental integrity assurances, that baselines are set conservatively, below business as usual, and that the risk of non-permanence is minimized. Step 3 is the buyer. Whether one has been identified, whether they're a national government or another buyer, the use the credits will be put to, and whether the buyer's country has entered a framework agreement for Article 6 cooperation with ours. Step 4 is the supporting documents, the letter of approval, any prior authorizations, the agreement with the buyer, and the project design document. And step 5 is a signed declaration. On the DNA side, the request is reviewed, with every version of it kept in a workflow history, because amendments to an authorization are themselves reportable. On approval, the DNA issues the letter of authorization, again with its serial number and its list of obligations, and with that, the MO becomes an AMO, an authorized mitigation outcome, shown on screen in the AMO holding account as an authorized mitigation outcome, cleared for international transfer. This is the heart of Article 6, so it's worth stating plainly. To authorize a unit is to commit the country to a corresponding adjustment, to add that ton back to its own emissions total so the buyer country can count it without both of them claiming it. In effect, the country gives up counting that reduction toward its own target so another can, which is why it takes the form of a formal, serial numbered instrument. Some countries also offer an earlier, conditional step before this, pre-authorization, which signals an intention to authorize a certain volume for a certain purpose with a particular buyer, subject to conditions. Whether it's available is set per country. Our units are now authorized. AMOs, cleared to cross a border. Next, the transfer that makes them ITMOs and the accounting behind it. Now the authorized units can move, and on the proponent side, a transfer is a short, 2-step request. Step 1 is the buyer, the amount, and the details. The buyer first, their name, address, organization category and contacts, and if the project has an upfront buyer from the concept note, these fill themselves in, together with two fields that decide what kind of movement this is: the acquiring party, the country the units go to, which becomes the counterparty on the corresponding adjustment. Article 6.2 distinguishes a party, a government, from an entity authorized by a party, and the registry records which. Then the amount, and watch the guardrail here. The platform shows maximum available as a total issued minus the 10% buffer, and it will not let them transfer more than they truly hold free, nor permit the first transfer of a unit that isn't authorized, or whose vintage is out of range. And then the part that makes this a mirror registry rather than a ledger of assertions: the source registry the units come from, the vintage year they belong to, and the serial range being transferred, the start and end serial of the block. Those are required. The registry is not minting these units. It is recording the movement of units that already exist somewhere else, and without the block and the vintage, there is nothing tying this transfer to them. The vintage in particular has to be stated rather than assumed, because it travels with the unit into the identifier and into the corresponding adjustment. The source registry is the one field the platform can fill in for you, defaulting to the carbon standard the project declared. A summary alongside shows the project, its total authorized ITMOs, and its status, so the numbers are never a mystery. Step 2 is the signed declaration, and it goes to the DNA. The DNA reviews the transfer, approve, return for correction, or reject with feedback. And once approved, the proponent comes back to process the payment, the adjustment fee on the transfer. On a valid first international transfer, the AMO becomes an ITMO in full, an internationally transferred mitigation outcome. And on the DNA's Article 6 transfers view, we can see it stamped with its own unique identifier. That identifier is worth reading out, because it is not an arbitrary string. It carries the host party, the mechanism, the vintage, the sector, and a sequence number. So UG A62, the vintage year, the sector code, and then the sequence. Read it and you know which country authorized the unit, under which Article 6 route, from which vintage and sector, without looking anything up. Beside it sits the provenance the registry mirrors, the source registry the units come from, the serial range being mirrored from that registry, a start and an end serial, so the exact block is identified rather than just a quantity, and a first transfer flag. The registry then produces a notice of transfer, the formal record, carrying the transfer reference, the volume, the source project, the acquiring party, and the confirmation that corresponding adjustments have been applied and the units will not be double counted. That first transfer does one more thing automatically. It writes a corresponding adjustment to the country's ledger. And because this is the entry that makes the whole Paris accounting work, it has its own section in the registry, corresponding adjustments in the main navigation alongside the compliance market rather than buried inside it. Every adjustment carries its own reference, a CA number, so it can be cited in reporting. The screen opens on the country's position. How much has been transferred out? Tons that can no longer be counted toward its own NDC? How much has been acquired? How much has actually been applied to the ledger, and how much is still sitting with the DNA waiting to be? And how many of these were first transfers, the ones that trigger an adjustment in the first place? Beneath that, the ledger position. Every adjustment sits at one of three stages: recorded, applied, then reported. And the bars show how much volume is at each, which is the working state of the country's Article 6, accounting on one screen. Alongside it, the same transfers measured against the annual transfer cap, with the alert and halt thresholds marked so the headroom can be seen being consumed as it happens. Then the register itself. Each entry shows whether it is a subtraction or an addition, what triggered it, the counterparty country, and the authorized use. And this is the part that matters for an audit: where it came from, the project that produced the units, the ITMO's unique identifier, the source registry the units are mirrored from, and a flag if it was a first transfer. An adjustment you can't trace back to the units that caused it isn't an accounting record. It's a number. Every entry here traces. The DNA works this ledger directly. A pending adjustment is applied to the national position, and once it has gone into the country's international reporting, it is marked as reported, and the whole register exports in one click with that provenance intact as the file the biennial transparency report is built from. This is the single rule that keeps the whole Paris market honest, no double counting. and the registry generates it as a byproduct of the transfer rather than reconstructing it by hand. And to be clear, this applies to Article 6 units only. Voluntary transfers never generate one. We finish where the authority spends its days. First, workflow management, the job queue, where every submission awaiting review is gathered in one place, filtered by what's mine, what's open, what's unassigned, and sortable by what's due soonest. This is how each task we've watched got in front of the right officer to begin with. Assignment rules route each type of work. Round robin, least loaded, or by committee, and each type carries its service level deadline with a target, a warning, and a breach threshold, and the clock pausing whenever a case is back with the proponent. Officers can claim a case, hand it over to a colleague with the reason on record, or release it back to the queue. Leave and availability are managed so work is never routed to someone who's away. And an append-only audit log keeps every workflow event on the record. Then the corresponding adjustments ledger we have just seen, which sits here as day-to-day work rather than a one-off, adjustments to apply, adjustments to mark reported, then the payment side, the ledger of every fee and transaction, and the approvals queue where manually submitted payments are confirmed. Then data analytics, the country's activity across the whole life cycle, projects, sectors, committees and reviews, finances, and the ITMO figures, scoped strictly to that country's own data. Then the regulatory reports, the registry's records of concept notes, project design documents, issuances, transfers, monitoring, authorizations, and committee members, each exportable to a structured Excel file with its own summary sheet. And underneath all of it, the security layer, the system audit logs, the security events, and the statistics over them. Who did what and when across the system. Taken together, these give the DNA accountability in both directions. The ability to show its own government that the pipeline is moving, and to show the international community that every ton is tracked, adjusted, and reported. And that brings us full circle, back to the public portal, where the project we followed now appears for anyone to see, verifiable by its serial numbers. That's ARC 1 registry, serving the DNA team, the proponents, and the public across both the voluntary and the compliance markets end to end.